Okay, so thank you everybody for being with us today. My name is Paola Sartorio and I'm the director of the U.S. Italy Fulbright Commission. Today we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Fulbright Program. That started in 1946 and in 1948 in Italy. Over the course of these decades, over 10,000 alumni have crossed the ocean to promote cultural exchanges between Italy and the US, between people and institutions of Italy and the United States. Since its start, alumni have been pioneers in the research fields, and often they have started new areas of study in their home country. The Commission today promotes innovative programs that have widened the impact of the Fulbright program, such as, for example, the deafness program that has Italian scholars taking courses and earning a master's degree at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., and U.S. Scholars coming to Italy to widen their knowledge of deafness in Italy. We also have an English teaching assistant program with assistants that contribute to opening up opportunities in Italian high schools where students have an opportunity of improving their English skills. For example, we also have a program with Fondazione Falcone, Fondazione Giovanni Falcone and NIAF that awards two scholarships, one for an Italian scholar and one for an American scholar, to promote the rule of law. So we are happy to see a program grow in size and also in terms of inclusivity, because it includes population, a type of population that would otherwise not be easily accessing the Fulbright program. Fulbright alumni are also very committed to their local communities. For example, just recently, an Italian alumna has participated in a COVID vaccine trial, being Italy's first person to be vaccinated when the vaccine was still on trial. So we are very happy to see such a vibrant community, and we are doing everything we can as a commission to make our program as accessible and inclusive as possible. So we're happy of these 75 years of the Fulbright program. This evening with us, we are going to host a conversation that I have very much wanted and worked hard on putting together. And we are going to have two incredible panelists. One is LaNitra Berger. She is a Senior Director of Fellowships in the Office of Undergraduate Education at George Mason University. She's also a NAFSA board member, and she's author of the book Irma. I have a hard time pronouncing Irma without my Italian accent. Stern and the Racial Paradox of South African Modern Art. LaNitra is also a longtime friend of the Fulbright Commission and has been involved with many of our activities in recent years. The second speaker is Fulbright alumna of 2010 and 11, Maaza Mengiste. We are very proud of her accomplishments as an author and winner. And she has recently published a novel by the title The Shadow King. And the moderator will be a board member of the Fulbright Commission, an American board member who has lived in Italy for the past, I believe, 20 years of his life. And he's a professor at the American University of Rome and choral director of Choro Afrique. So I'm very pleased to give the floor to Tim and start this conversation. I'm very much looking forward to listening to it. Thank you so much. Sorry, Tim, I forgot to say that for those who have questions, please leave them at the end when there will be 15 minutes devoted to a Q&A session. And then we'll be reading those questions and panelists will answer. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Paola. I would like to start off just congratulating both of you for your the things that you do, your works, particularly the ones that we will be discussing today. And I would like for this conversation to be about the two of you as individuals, as educators, as writers, and also as artists. And the connection and the fact that you're able to do all that because of your experiences abroad, having lived abroad in other countries, having learned other languages and cultures that enabled you and still enable you to do the things that you do. So I would like for our conversation to be about that, to be about you guys. I'd like to start off with a question that I would like for both of you to answer. We'll start with Maaza. Italy. When you first came to Italy as a Fulbright recipient, what were your expectations? Did you have any? Were there any stories that you had been told about the Italians? Anything to watch out for? Just sort of give us an idea of, you know, a young woman, an American, a woman of color, and how all of those things sort of were a part of your first experience with this country.
Thank you for that, Timothy. And let me start off by thanking Paola and you and Chiara and everyone for organizing this and making this happen. And LaNitra, I am so thrilled to be having a conversation with you and to hear you eventually talk about this amazing book. I started thinking about of Italy. One of the first memories that came to me was I made a trip to Italy with my mother when I was about, oh my gosh, I had to be maybe 10 years old, between 10 and 12. And we were just walking through Rome, and I remember being in that place, and I don't remember where we were standing, maybe near the Foro. And I thought at that moment, I said, oh, I don't ever want to leave this place. I want to come back one day and stay. And when I was told that I had won the Fulbright, I thought back to that moment. And so it felt in some ways like going to a place that was somewhat familiar, but because of I knew the history between Italy and Ethiopia, it also felt like it felt like I was moving into something that was both bigger than me, but also very much a part of me. And I remember being in Rome when I was a child and noticing how many people looked like members of my family. Mm-hmm. And so I was excited. I didn't know what to expect. I really did not know what to expect. So I was also terrified of the whole experience, whatever was going to unfold. But I was mostly excited. Okay. But I had no idea what to expect.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Wow. Wow. And LaNitra, let's first talk about, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about your first impressions of South Africa. Going there for the first time, again, as an American, as a young woman, as a woman of color, did anyone notice that you were from someplace else? Did you immediately just fit in? How was it that for you?
Thank you so much for the question, Tim. And I also want to second Maaza's thanks to Paula, Chiara, and to you for this conversation. I've been so involved with Fulbright for the last 11 years, and every year has been a thrill and a joy. And this is, such an exciting day for me to be with Maaza, who I've been a fan of your work for a really long time. So I'm so excited to be here. I love your question, Tim, because South Africa has been a place that's been important to me since I was about Maaza's age when she went to Italy, around 9 or 10, maybe even a little bit earlier.
Wow.
My parents came from the segregated South to California, which is where I was born. And so they described their childhoods as being, that which was, filled with the horrors of living in a segregated place in the South. But because I grew up in California in the 70s and 80s, I didn't see what they saw. But my understanding of South Africa during apartheid was the closest thing that I got to really understanding what their experience was like. And I remember deeply how they would talk about Nelson Mandela being imprisoned and the fear that maybe he wasn't alive, that maybe South Africa would never become a democratic country, that he'd never be released. And so we talked about that in our family a lot. So it was always a place that I was very interested in visiting, and I didn't think that I would fall into this book topic and get a chance to live there. So I was so excited to move to South Africa in 2004. I had just gotten married and I left my poor husband behind and moved to South Africa by myself. And the transition wasn't as I expected. I thought that I was going to be accepted as a Black woman on the African continent. And, South Africa has such a complex and fraught racial history that people really struggle to figure out who I was and where I fit in. So sometimes people thought I was colored, which is a middle racial category that they have in South Africa, but not in the United States. Sometimes people thought I was from Europe. They didn't always assume that I was American. And so I encountered a lot of resistance from some people when I was in places that were Black spaces because I considered myself to be Black, but
Right.
people there didn't think I was Black. And as soon as I said, hey, I'm American, then people would say, oh, wow, welcome, you're great, please come. So it was really destabilizing at first, but eventually I really leaned into it and started to enjoy the fact that I could socialize in a lot of different spaces and really meet lots of different people that way. So even though it was tough at the beginning, it really became a part of who I was. And by the end, I didn't want to leave.
Excellent. Wow. I find it really fascinating that both of your stories, your novels, take place in African countries, more or less around the same time. They sort of coincide with one another in terms of dates and wars and a lot of important historical facts. Let's go to your works. I'll start now with Maaza again. The Shadow King. Could you tell us who is Huit?
Yeah, well, that's okay. She's the central character in a novel that has many main characters, but she's the central one. She's a maid who is growing up in a village in Ethiopia in the 1930s, and when war comes, the household in which she works is the home of a nobleman and his wife, and the nobleman is going to lead an army, but his wife wants to lead an army of women. And Hirut, as the war starts, transitions from a maid into a soldier. And we see her progression through this novel as Mussolini's forces invade. she begins to question what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a soldier. She asks questions about what it means to have an enemy. You know, who is the enemy when the people closest to you are not necessarily treating you as well as they should.
Okay. Now, what made you write this story? And you know, what this particular story, and how long had this story been with you?
Oh, good question, Tim. I heard stories about Italy's invasion of Ethiopia, you know, in the late 1890s in an attempt to colonize it, and then Mussolini coming back to avenge the Italians in 1935 and invade Ethiopia once more and make it a colony finally. I'd heard these stories because this is just, in Ethiopia, it's a story of victory and determination.
Right.
I grew up thinking, whoa, this is an epic. This is an epic story of a David and Goliath. So that story had been with me. What I didn't realize, which was something that I really found to be one of the things I treasure most about the Fulbright, is that being in Italy helped me talk to enough people, both Ethiopian, Eritrean, Somali, and Italian. And I realized that as much as the fascists had their propaganda in the 30s about this war, Ethiopia had its own propaganda.
Yes.
And so my time at the Fulbright ended up being a way of unlearning this history that I had grown up with, to begin to figure out, wait, what was actually going on? And how do I begin to construct a novel around this?
Okay, I'm gonna get to you. One more thing I need to know for me from this story. You have this wonderful juxtaposition of Radames and Aida, no? And Verdi, the Giuseppe Verdi, who was the most prominent opera composer of the day during the Italy's unification. I'm curious to know if you ever consider that Ettore and Hirut would become an Aida and a Radames in your story.
Oh, you sound like my editor.
Okay, so I'm not that crazy.
You do sound like my editor, because it was one of the first things that she said. She said, well, why can't we just make them fall in love? I said, no. She said, but this is what happened.
Right.
Aida.
I'm asking that question, but I really love the fact that you stayed your ground and did not let that go there.
I did. And you know, I kept thinking about should I think there is love in the novel, but the love is very soft and quiet and in the background. But this idea of Aida and Radames and all of this, eventually I said, I don't think that Hirut would fall for this. I don't think that.
There were moments when we thought that she would.
Yeah, she's gonna say, what are you doing? You know, have I had enough trouble with all of these men in my life, you know, basically.
Okay.
I think, and part of it also was, I really like Verdi, and I think that the opera Aida's the performance of it, the production of it is beautiful. Nabucco is also one of my favorites. But I remember watching Aida, not the first time, but it took a while to take apart the pageantry and really look at the story.
Okay.
And when at some point I was sitting there at the opera, and it came to this point where Aida is about to go into the dungeon, and I remember going, oh my God, you stupid girl! Like, what are you doing? Timothy in the book.
Okay, all right.
Sorry.
Okay. Got it. I had to ask that question. We're going to come back to you. I'd like to go to LaNitra. Now, allora, with you instead, and I love this Jewish connection here between your two works. And your case is much bigger. It's larger than life in your book. Could you tell us who is Irma Stern? Who is she? How did you find her, or did she find you?
Yes, well, to build on what Maaza was saying about her characters, I also feel like that one of the things that we have in common is really trying to probe the deep complexities of women. And so often, too often, women are portrayed in such one-dimensional ways, particularly women of color and women artists in the case of my book as well. And so to be able to put multiple layers, some of the layers are good layers and some of the layers are not so good layers, but to depict women in all their complexity is something that I think that we've both been trying to do in our work. So Irma Stern, I think after 22 years of studying Irma Stern, I think that I can say that she found me. I was in graduate school at the very beginning of my time, and I was looking for something to write about for one semester. And literally an auction catalog from South Africa fell off of the bookshelf, and when it fell open, there was an Irma Stern work of a Black woman. It was a watercolor. And it was so stunning and beautiful that I was captivated by it. So I looked at it, I saw her name. It didn't sound like a very typical South African name to me. So as I started doing the research on who she was, I realized, wow, this woman is really interesting. She doesn't really fit into the very narrow confines of successful artists. She's South African, but she's also Jewish. So there was a lot about her that I felt didn't fit any kind of conventions. And so I wrote this paper, and really my interest is in, French West Africa. So I was trying to get back to France or to get to Senegal or somewhere in West Africa. I didn't speak German. I was interested in South Africa, but for my dissertation, I wanted to stay in the French speaking world. And my advisor, in all of his wisdom, said, you know what, this is your topic. You found your topic. So I started learning German from scratch. I started doing this research on Irma Stern. And, she's someone who, even after all these years of being with her and studying her, is someone who is deeply complex, very interesting, has some extraordinary aspects of her biography, but also some things that are deeply problematic. And I think that was really important for me to write about someone who I wasn't completely in love with, that I could take some critical distance to. So, Stern was born in 1894 and died in 1966. So her life really corresponds with some of the most consequential events of the 20th century. She saw a lot in her lifetime. And she was born to German Jewish parents in South Africa, but she and her family traveled back and forth from South Africa to Germany many times before there were airplanes. And because of that, she had this very transatlantic existence. She was very much rooted in South Africa and in the Jewish community in South Africa, but she also exhibited in Europe. She had a European gallery dealer. She traveled all over Europe all the time. And so that really informed her approach and her thinking to her artwork. She spent a lot of time in South Africa, particularly in rural areas, painting Black women in particular. So that was a specific focus of her work. And she's really left us with a large body of paintings and watercolors and drawings that really depict a lot of very diverse African experiences. She painted a lot in South Africa. She spent a lot of time there, but she also was in the Belgian Congo. She was in Zanzibar. So she was in all of these really, really important parts of the African continent during a very historically important time.
Okay, now your book points out quite often how her subject material, her subjects were mainly people of color, but her political leanings weren't necessarily in their favor. that she was a supporter of apartheid, and very rarely was outspoken about her political positions in general. My question to you is, had she not existed, had her works not been there, would there have been someone there to take her place?
Ooh, that's a really interesting question. So I do think about the question of what if Irma Stern had not painted the subjects that she painted?
That she was highly criticized for having done.
Yes, yes. So on the one hand, she was celebrated as, you know, South Africa's most famous modern artist, while at the same time being criticized for painting Black women in particular in a way that showed more of their human side, of their human nature.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had an interesting conversation with someone who worked at the Irma Stern Museum many years ago. And because of the way apartheid was so focused on separating Black people from their culture and from their heritage, this young woman said to me that it was through Irma Stern's paintings of women of various ethnic groups in South Africa that she learned about her own culture and heritage. So even as a Black woman, she was so separated from her heritage because of apartheid that she had to learn about her own background through Stern's work. And that was a really powerful conversation that I had with her that really helped me to see that, you know, Stern was certainly imperfect. She's an example of, you know, when we're talking about Fulbright and the importance of international exchange, she's someone who had so many opportunities to live abroad and to travel, yet somehow the travel didn't break down all of her prejudices. And in some ways, even reinforced some of them. And this is the work that we do as international educators, is try to break down these barriers. So I think that she, had she not painted, had she not, you know, become an artist, I think that there were other artists at the time who may have filled that void, but not in the same way that Irma Stern did, just because of the nature of her ability to have trained in Germany with the Expressionists, to have had that early South African upbringing where she was out living in the rural areas. And so in that sense, what I'm getting from your question as well is that she contributes such an important set of ideas to the way that we think about women artists in particular, and the way that we think about how Black people are portrayed on canvas, that's really the part that makes her so incredibly unique. And a lot of that contribution was guided, supported, and bolstered by the Jewish community in South Africa.
Okay, all right. Okay, let's go back over here for a second. The ending of your book, to have the emperor incognito. All, if I remember correctly, all happening in this sort of train station. It almost appears that Hirut is the voice of patriotism, is the voice of nationalism, and that the emperor he's the voice of magnanimity in a certain sense when it comes to that whole thing of the letter of for Etere and his father. And I was really impressed that that she didn't want to give that letter up. And had the emperor not been there, Etere might have never have gotten that letter. Now, am I remembering correctly? The ending. This is sort of this sort of trio situation in the train station. Could you talk a little bit about that and how it culminated and concluded in that way?
Yeah, the book begins in 1974, and that ending that you're talking about, it ends also in 1974. So this book, this story that's about 1935, begins and ends 40 years after. And one of the questions that I was asking about war, about conflict, is what do you do with the aftermath? What do you do with all of the memories and all of the traumas? And Hirut went through, she went through hell in that war.
Yeah.
And I think one of the questions that she had to, that she began to realize that she needed to ask herself was, as the Italians are coming in, as the invasion and the war is starting, she's also being sexually assaulted by the leader of her army, the man Kidane.
Yeah.
And she begins to wonder, when they tell me that I'm fighting for my country, but somebody who's fighting with me is hurting me, aren't I worth as much as a country? Isn't a girl worth as much as a country? What am I fighting for exactly? And those are the questions that she carries with her through the war, but I think it still resonates 40 years later. Isn't a girl worth as much as a country? Isn't a woman worth as much? Aren't I worth my own defense, as opposed to some nation with borders? So at that end that you're talking about, that patriotism is in a sense a defense of herself, I think. That nationalism she's seeing her own self as a country. And she has some things to uphold as a soldier and as a woman and as a survivor. And part of it she's trying to figure out what forgiveness looks like.
Mm-hmm.
When Ettore is across from her saying, hey, the Italians treated me like an enemy too. And she says, am I supposed to forgive everything you did because of that?
Right.
And so that letter becomes a gesture of, she's releasing some of that her own pain. And the emperor being there is, in a sense, I think, reminding her that you are a soldier, you are someone who defends what you hold dear. So all of that, yeah, thank you for noting that ending. It was a delicate balancing act. And I just have to say, there are no spoiler alerts. I haven't read the book.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It was such an incredible trio ending.
So, I thank you. We didn't give anything away, but
okay.
The question is, it's really, I think this thing that LaNitra has also mentioned that I find really important is that writing women who are complicated, because women are complicated, and beginning to understand the very complicated place that women inhabit in any time of unrest or upheaval or conflict or uprising. And we see it with Irma Stern, and I think we see it with Hirut and Aster and all these women.
Definitely.
They're not necessarily, whatever side that women are on, it does not necessarily mean it's the morally upright side. That's another thing. We have to complicate our women, and that was what I also wanted to do with that end that you're talking about, Timothy, is Hirut has gone through a lot, but she's bitter and she's angry.
Yeah, she holds on to that.
She resents and she holds on to that. And maybe there's nothing wrong in holding on to that. Even as you have this gesture of forgiveness, maybe that anger is what keeps us going sometimes.
Okay. LaNitra. First of all, thank you, because I learned so much from your book. I'm still just all over the map with Belgium, Congo, and Zanzibar, and the Arab mix in there, and the Indian mix, and wow, really. I'll have to read it again several times to take it all in. And, following Miss Stern in all of these journeys, even though, as you mentioned often in your book, how her writings together with her illustrations are a bit superficial compared to the actual images that are being seen in these illustrations. Again, if knowing what you know in terms of your work, and also as an advisor to the Biden administration, if you were asked today by the Italian government, by Draghi himself, for some advice on Italy's fairly new population of people of color. I mean, Italy has never seen so many different shades in their entire history. It's common in France. It's even more common in Germany and in Spain. But I've been here for 20 years, over 20 years now, and I've seen this incredible growth and you know, people who are now naturalized citizens, who you look at them and you wouldn't expect that they speak Italian as their mother language. What advice, knowing what you know, would you give to the Italian government if you were asked to be, you know, a consultant of such?
Oh my goodness, that's a huge question, and a great opportunity to really explore the goals of the Fulbright program of mutual understanding and international exchange. There's so much richness in the question, and I'm thinking about the last time, one of the last times I traveled, I came to Italy, to Rome, to be with Paola and her team. And we had a fantastic conversation about her program and the direction it was going. We drove around Rome. We looked at some monuments to various elements of the colonial legacy in Italy. And you know, it was then that I hadn't been to Italy in a while. So in that trip, I saw how much more diverse the country had become. And you know, even when it's hard, even when you feel like you don't have anything in common with someone, it's really important to try to get to know people as individuals. And that's really what the Fulbright program does. And that's really what we're all here to do, is to really sit down and connect with individuals. And sometimes I think that's hard. People are scared. You know, you have to be vulnerable and you have to show a bit of yourself. But it's the real, you know, when you sit down with someone and really share a meal or a coffee, that's where you really start to get to know people. And so, you know, in countries that maybe don't have the same, you know, long history of migration and immigration, it can seem daunting, or it can seem like a threat to your way of life. And that can cause people to decide not to participate in the process of mutual understanding. But it's really, to me, I think that, you know, remaining open, remaining open-minded, and being able to open your doors and your hearts to people is really, you know, the first step in being able to be more welcoming and open. It's easier said than done. In the United States, you know, we are imperfect. We struggle with this a lot. A lot of my work focuses on, you know, the importance of mutual understanding abroad, but also at home, you know, and how do you take those ideals and apply them to your own neighborhood? And that's a very hard concept for people to reconcile. So I'm not saying that it's easy. There's a lot of things about it that make people nervous, but I think that being as open as you possibly can, and understanding that, you know, who you are is evolving and can change. To me, I think that's really the first step in many steps towards being a more open culture that is welcoming to everyone.
Okay, all right, excellent. I think, you know, we're pretty much there with time. We have about 4 minutes. So if there's anything that we haven't discussed that you would, you know, both like to add, you have 2 minutes each to sort of close this off, and then we'll go to whatever questions there might be waiting for us from our audience.
You know, I don't know what I would say. I don't know if there are people watching who are thinking about applying for the Fulbright to Italy. I would really recommend it. It changed my life completely in a way that I didn't anticipate and I didn't expect. I go back often. It is a place that every time I'm there, I never want to leave. I have friends there who are like family now. And my entire intellectual world, my imagination has expanded. So I would heartily encourage everyone to apply. It's a wonderful program.
LaNitra?
I would second that. I think that Fulbright has been around for 75 years for a reason. It's a life-changing experience. I've worked with over 50 students who have gone all over the world on Fulbrights. And to me, it's one of my greatest life accomplishments is seeing how all of these students go overseas and they come back and they're forever changed. They have new family, they have new friends, they have new connections. Their worlds are opened up. And most importantly, they bring those lessons back home with them. So I think that that's such an important part. It can seem scary to put yourself out there in an application, but that's why there's people like me out there, the Fulbright Program Advisors, to help you with that. So I would highly, highly recommend that everybody consider applying. And then just one last thing I just wanted to say to Maaza, I feel like we've both written almost the same book, except yours is a novel and mine is nonfiction, because so much of what the issues and themes that you are covering and exploring in your work are things that were really, really close to my heart in studying Irma Stern. She was not a perfect person, but none of us are. And the ability to really probe into her imperfections, but also the things that really shifted the art world was really something that was important to me as a scholar, and what I hope comes through in the book. And so I love that you talk about all of these women who are struggling with these contradictions and these paradoxes, and there's no easy answers. It's very challenging for them to reconcile on a daily basis how they're going to move through the world, but that's really what we all are like. We all have these inner paradoxes and contradictions. And I think that it's so important that your book and this type of literature goes out there so that people really understand and can process that complexity.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both. Let's go to Paola to see if we have any questions out there.
Sure, let me have a look. No, we don't have questions.
Okay.
Perhaps I have a question for LaNitra and Maaza. In different ways, but you have done so much to promote the Fulbright program. LaNitra is a Fulbright advisor in her university, and Maaza is an alumna herself that I know from firsthand experience, does not miss an opportunity to speak highly of her experience in Italy. So what would be your suggestions, or how do you feel about for prospective candidates who may be people of color, or that might feel some hesitancy, to come to Italy? How would you, address this kind of hesitation? And yeah, what suggestions do you have?
I don't know if there's any other country I would have wanted to go as a Fulbright fellow other than Italy, not just for my research, but I think as a person of color, there is work that needs to happen. Clearly, there's work that needs to happen in Italy. There's work that needs to happen in the United States. There's work that needs to happen in every place. But when I was there, and even in 2010, and I think so much has changed since then, I felt an energy in Italy by Italians who are second generation from different parts of the world. There's an energy that was there that was exciting to be a part of, to have conversations. And I've always said, and it sprang from my year at the Fulbright, that the changes that happen throughout Europe are going to begin in Italy, and they're going to be initiated by Italy. And I have always felt that. I would tell people still, you know, that culturally, Italy will be a little bit different than the United States, but again, some of the kindest people that I met that opened their doors to me without ever knowing me, you know, complete strangers were in Italy. And so I would recommend people go. But I think it's good. Maybe the one thing is to have maybe one or two people that could be your support while you're there, maybe a friend on text or someone who's actually in Italy. I made friends with everyone in that Fulbright office. I was walking there almost every day, asking questions about mail, asking questions about where can I go for this, and I took advantage of what was there also. But there are so many organizations in Italy working with people of color that I think that it's easier now to find a community than even when I was there. And I would say that, find that community.
LaNitra.
So this is the point where I want to give a huge shout out to the Fulbright Noir community and all the other amazing affinity groups out there on Instagram who are really showing what the diversity of experience is like on the Fulbright program. When I studied abroad, when I lived abroad, it was still the early years of the internet. People didn't really have cell phones and things like that. And so it was really hard to find those communities. You had to really work to do that. But now there's, with social media, you know, the Italian Fulbright Commission has a really wonderful Instagram feed where you can really picture what your Fulbright experience will look like just by looking at that. And that's a huge advantage. As a Fulbright Program Advisor myself, to me, it's really important to have these kinds of conversations where people can see two women of color who have lived abroad, who have done it and have survived it and thrived because of it. It's much harder for people to say, oh, that's not for me, if they can look on this recording and see that we've done it and that it changed our lives. So I think it's really important, particularly for students of color, for faculty of color, for anybody of color, to get out of their comfort zone and go overseas. When I'm advising students, there are very few places that I would tell a student not to go. I think that part of diversity and inclusion is supporting intellectual curiosity. Everyone should have the right to follow their curiosities. And so I try to support students as best as I can in following those curiosities. And like Maaza said, really helping them develop a scaffolding and a support so that when they are overseas, they have friends, they know how to make connections, and they can find those new communities.
Okay, thank you so much, LaNitra. We have 3 questions, so I will go one by one. One is from a Fulbright alumna. She's asking, what do you all think is the importance or value of exploring creativity and art during a Fulbright year?
Wow. That depends. If the question is talking about exploring the creativity that's included in the project or maybe even outside of it, I would say that part of what happened with me on the Fulbright is my experiences in Italy with artists, the conversations that I was having started to change the shape of my work, my project. And that's part of the beauty of being somewhere where you don't know very well and you're open to so much. I would say that be open to the many different ways that a project can be transformed, the way that your imagination can move in an unexpected direction. That's really the gift that a Fulbright offers, is the thing that you don't know right now. that you realize later will change the way you approach your work, maybe forever. So I would say it's really important. Keep your mind open and definitely seek out the work, the art that's there. Be in communication with other people doing things differently from you.
Okay. Then Maaza, there's these two next questions are both for you. One says, in The Shadow King, Hirut remarks that a tourist picture of her in prison did not capture her thoughts at the moment of killing him. When doing research for your book with pictures or archives, how did you feel about reviving the memories and stories behind these images?
Thank you for that. I would love to hear LaNitra also answer this question in relation to Irma Stern's work. But
That's the pictures there.
Oh, and I think what I found with looking at those photographs, it was interesting work, and it's not as it wasn't some of it was of course disturbing, but so much of it was I don't know, it was affirming. It was affirming to me that something survives over the years, something survives past time, past borders, past language. There's something that's there in the photographs that I felt was still alive and still breathing, so that no matter what happened to the people in looking at those images, I believe that that act of looking is sometimes an act of resurrection. We bring things back, and we learn to look at them again and make them breathe in the present moment. So I found it inspiring sometimes, as much, and yeah, I don't know. I don't even know if inspiring is the right word. That's a very good question that is being asked, but not as dark as I think some people think, because something survives beyond whatever reality of that image, and that something is the thing that reminds us that we are all human, and that everything we do matters in the end, even beyond what we can imagine.
Okay, and then there's another question from an alumna. It's quite long, so in the interest of time, I'm gonna have to cut it a little bit. But it says, your writing reconstructs experiences under Italian colonialism, but in a way that is accessible to the public. How important do you feel literature is in telling colonial narratives in Italy? During your writing process, what types of colonial materials have you encountered or collected?
Okay, so I'll answer that, but before I do, just briefly, just have you talk about what it was like looking through Irma Stern's images.
I'm an art historian and I love archives. And it's my favorite thing to do is to sit in an archive and look through papers. So I spent, months looking through Irma Stern's voluminous archive. And other people have written about Irma Stern before, but I'm the first Black American woman to have written a book about her. And so in many ways, I was looking for evidence of Blackness that other people didn't necessarily see. And, just reading her letters, reading her own notes, looking at her correspondence with other colleagues, I started to see this complex picture, that I mentioned earlier, of this woman who was both deeply interested in Black women in particular, but also deeply conflicted because of her own, racist, education that she had received as a woman, a white woman living in South Africa. And so I was constantly trying to reconcile, how did she have such deep connections to women, Black women in particular, on canvas while having these views? And, you know, the answer for me was in the archives. You know, I read through all the newspaper clippings, and I read through all the criticism of her. They picked apart her body type and said she had frizzy hair. And when she was out in Black communities, she was not judged for those things. And so I can see how she found that as a respite from the regular things that she was experiencing in South Africa. And so, you know, really being in the archives, you know, piecing together that story while also seeing South Africa progress into an apartheid era totalitarian state really helped me to square those two. So looking at newspapers that denigrated Black people and talked about violence against Black people, and then seeing how Irma Stern was responding to that artistically really helped me to understand what was going through her mind, but also how she was shaped by these external forces. So, you know, the archives were just crucial in helping me tell that story.
Thank you. And Paula, I think that the question about how important do I feel literature is in telling colonial narratives in Italy, I think literature is really, it's very important. I think LaNitra, as we've been talking now, artwork itself is also a form of storytelling. It's a narrative in itself. It's really hard sometimes to understand what happens on a very individual and human level when colonialism, you know, colonialism takes over a country, or authoritarianism takes over a country. We can talk about the victimhood of people who are subjugated, but literature can help us understand that the other side also is impacted and can be destroyed by that. And that was one of the things that I wanted to show in my novel, was that fascism destroyed everyone, not just one group of people. Eventually it came back home and began to devour its own. And we see that again and again throughout history in different places. So literature helps us understand what human beings, the individuals, the families, the women, the men, the children are going through when things like that happen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been an incredible session. It's exactly what I was hoping to get out of it. So I really am grateful to the three of you for making this conversation so interesting. In the chat, we've had a few people commenting, and everybody is super happy about how the panel went. So I really want to thank all of you for your time and for making it so exciting. I don't know, we need to do something more about this. This has gone so well. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you all, and thank you to all the participants. Thank you, Tim.
This is for our audience. Okay. Ladies, bravissime, bravissime. And eventually we'll all connect, okay? Thank you very much for this honor.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.